This year we are getting our fourth Fantastic Four film, but it is the first one for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So every month this year we are getting a facsimile edition reprint of those first 12 issues of the Fantastic Four. And as I show you issue number 1, I wanted to kind of go over the launch of the modern Marvel Universe. So the prehistory of Marvel started with Marvel Comics number 1 in 1939, and it debuted some superheroes like Namor the Submariner, the original Android the Human Torch, and those ran for a decade, 1939 to 1949, and then they made a brief comeback from 1953 to 1955. Joining with them was another popular character, Captain America, 1940 to 1949, and made a brief return in 1954. That was it. There was a 6-year gap before the launch of the modern Marvel Universe, starting with Fantastic Four issue 1 from August of 1961. This was a response, as the story goes, to the previous year's debut of the Justice League of America from DC Comics, where they were having some success by having a team up of all of their main characters that weren't Batman and Superman, and the edict came down to writer Stan Lee, hey, why don't we get our superheroes together and make a team and have some success with that, okay? So he didn't do that. He made up a new team, and here we go. Stan Lee was 38 years old at the time, and this was drawn by Jack Kirby, who was 43 years old at the time. And when this comic came out, 17 other titles from Marvel came out that month alone. None of them were superheroes, and I'll tell you about what those were in a minute. So let's take a look here. You've got a monster breaking through the street, and 4 characters kind of look monstrous themselves in a way. Look, on fire, rocks, weird stretchy, she's disappearing. There's no superhero costumes. Maybe this is just a monster book. On the cover you see MC, that stands for Marvel Comics. It had only started appearing on their comic books 2 months prior to the debut of this issue. You've got your Gain Mighty Muscles ad, and here we go. We launch into the story. You got Reed Richards sending up the signal to call the Fantastic Four up in the sky. So we show Invisible Girl turning invisible, sneaking out of a party, going down the street, getting the taxi, trying to pay for it. He gets freaked out and leaves. Okay, hidden in the trench coat trying to buy clothes is the Thing. No luck. He's too big for the clothes. He sees the signal up in the sky. He's got to get out of there too. Crashing out, crashing up through the street, cars crashing into him. Quite monstrous, right? Now we go over to Johnny Storm's brother of the Invisible Girl's sister. Working on a hot rod, sees the signal in the sky, turns into flames, flies off to meet his meet his friends, melts the car in the process. An ad for building something, a heavy-duty condensing unit. Okay. And Human Torch accidentally melting jet fighters, but everyone's falling to safety. That's good. And we've got Reed Richards using his stretchy powers to save the Human Torch, who used up his flames. And now they're all there in a room together. Thing has his trench coat disguise on again. Interesting. And now they do a flashback back to how it all began, and it shows their origin. Okay, they're sneaking off onto a rocket to go into space because they want to beat the commies, who were going to go up into space first. And they get bombarded by cosmic rays, which affects them by giving them all of these powers, which manifest themselves when they get back on Earth. Here we go, another ad to become a shoe salesman. And the Thing is not very happy about it. He's angry at Reed because he's been turned into a monster. Johnny finds out he can fly, pretty excited about that, but he's setting everything on fire. Anyways, they become a team. And now we bring in the villain of the piece, the Mole Man. There's danger afoot. They've got to go investigate. You've got your ad of little goofy jokes and hot candies and what have you. They're seeing earthquakes. The military is attacking a monster. And Fantastic Four tracks the earthquakes to this place, Monster Isle. They fly off there and they encounter giant monsters. And they're battling them, fall down into the earth below, where they see a field, a valley of diamonds hoarded over by the Mole Man. sell grit. And now the Mole Man's secret, okay? Another goofy ad battling the monsters of Monster Isle, and Mole Man goes over his origin. He was shunned by the world, and he went off to make something out of himself. Finds himself in, frozen wasteland, falls into the earth, becomes blind, somehow controls all of the monsters, and learns Bojutsu, and now commands the monsters to attack the Fantastic Four. I don't know what his game plan is, but he does not win because they conquer the monsters. They conquer Mole Man. The end. Add to become an artist, add to sell Christmas cards, add to build electronics, and an ad to become an artist. All right. So I first read this when I was a kid. We had this pocketbook in the late 70s, issues 1 through 6. So here's issue 1, tiny size, right? So I was familiar with these stories since I was a little kid. Now that Marvel is owned by Disney, they put out this comic as well. What if Mickey and his friends became the Fantastic Four? So this is kind of lame, I guess, unless you're a little kid. Maybe it's even lame for little kids. The interesting part is the creators look to be all Italian, I guess. Riccardo Secchi, Lorenzo Pastrovicio, Lucio Rivodote, Laura Tartaglia. Another interesting thing is they are using the black and white versions of the characters. So you got Mickey and Donald and Daisy and Goofy. There's Clarabelle Cow. I don't know what, the rest of them are like the regular color versions, but these are the black and white ones. Isn't that weird? Their clothing is in color. The comic is in color. All the characters are in color. So Donald, because he is the Thing, he is in color. But look, Horse Collar is also the black and white version. I don't know why they're doing that. But anyways, it's just kind of a supposed comical take on that first issue. I didn't laugh. I just, I'm not the target audience. I'm not 3 years old. So why did I buy it? I don't know. It was there on the shelf. But anyways, and Mole Man is Pete. And they didn't use the black and white version of Pete. They did the color version. I really don't get the thought process behind this. I'd like to ask that Italian team what they were thinking. No, you know what? I really don't care. And so there you go. The end. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what else was going on at the time. So here are the other comics that came out from Marvel in the same month, August of 1961. You had Strange Tales issue 90, which was a horror comic that started in 1951. By issue 110, they brought in the character Doctor Strange. Okay, you had Journey into Mystery issue 73 and 74. This was a monster comic that started in 1952 as a horror comic, then it became a monster comic, and Thor made his debut in issue 83. You had Tales to Astonish issue 25, which was a science fiction comic that started in 1959, and Hank Pym, who would later become the Ant-Man, made his debut in issue 27, so 2 months after this, but he wasn't a superhero yet. It was just a science fiction story where a man shrinks down to ant size and communicates with ants. Okay, that comic eventually became the comic called The Incredible Hulk. You had Tales of Suspense issue 23, which was a science fiction comic started in 1959. Iron Man made his debut in issue 39 of it, and that comic eventually became called Captain America. You had Amazing Adventures issue 6, which was a science fiction comic that started in 1961. It became Amazing Adult Fantasy with issue 7, and then you also had Amazing Adult Fantasy issue 7 come out this month, and that ran till issue 15. Issue 15, they just changed the name to Amazing Fantasy. It was the final issue, and that's where Spider-Man made his debut. He was one of the stories in that issue. You also had Millie the Model issue 105, which was a romance comic that started in 1945 and ran for 28 years. You had Life with Millie issue 13, which is a Millie the Model spin-off comic. It started as a comic called A Date with Millie in 1959. It became Life with Millie, and then Modeling with Millie, and the total run for that comic was 18 years. You also had Patsy Walker issue 97, which was another romance comic, started in 1945. It ran for 22 years. You had Patsy and Hetty issue 79, which was a Patsy Walker spin-off comic, started in 1952 and ran for 15 years. You had Love Romance issue 96, which was a romance comic, started in 1948 and ran for 15 years. You had Teenage Romance issue 84. It started as My My Romance in 1948. It became My Own Romance, then Teenage Romance, and it ended with issue 86, which was 2 months after this month. You had Kathy issue 13, which was a romance comic started in 1959 and ran for 5 years. And then you had Linda Carter, Student Nurse, issue 2. It was a romance comic started in 1961, only ran for a year. The interesting thing is Linda Carter was the name of the actress who played Wonder Woman in the 1970s. You also had Kid Colt Outlaw, issue 101, which was a Western comic that started in 1949 and it ran for 30 years. You also had Gunsmoke Western, issue 67, which was a Western comic, started as All Western Winners in 1948. Then it became Western Tales of the Black Rider, then Gunsmoke Western, and the total run for that series was 15 years. You also had Rawhide Kid, issue 25, which was a Western comic that started in 1955. It ran for 22 years. That is a lot of comics for 1 month, and only one of which was a superhero comic. And as you could see inside, they weren't really superheroes. They had no costumes. It was just a bunch of monsters, but that's how it all began. So the next month, September 1961, you had Fantastic Four issue 2, and then you had in another comic, Hank Pym was a guy who in a science fiction story became ant-size, but he wasn't a superhero yet. That's your second character that would become a superhero in the modern Marvel Universe. Now it would be all the way until February of 1962 where Namor the Submariner made his return to Marvel Comics in issue 4 of the Fantastic Four. And it was the same month that the Incredible Hulk made his debut. Again, Incredible Hulk, a monster. So really, do we have superheroes? I don't know. I mean, at this point, the Fantastic Four had made costumes for themselves. So, but really it's still a monster romance Western company. Now you got April of 1962 is the debut of Dr. Doom in Fantastic Four issue 5. So you can see it took a while before they brought Dr. Doom in. Prior to that, they're doing stuff like battling the Mole Man on Monster Island and Namor the Submariner. It's too bad that these Fantastic Four movies always incorporate Dr. Doom in the debut origin film. I wish they'd hold off on him a little bit, bring him in later, something to build to, but they never seem to do it because here they're going to do it a fourth time again. Then in June of 1962, Spider-Man makes his debut, Thor makes his debut, and Hank Pym becomes Ant-Man. They all made their debut on the same day, 10 months after Fantastic Four issue 1. Fantastic Four issue 6 was released the following week, and in it had Namor and Dr. Doom teaming up. Pretty cool. Then in December of 1962, Iron Man made his debut. It was the same time as Fantastic Four issue 12, and also the same time as Spider-Man issue 1, which was the first time you got to see the character again since his debut 6 months earlier. The following year, in March of 1963, you had Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos getting their own comic book. Now, this was just a World War II war comic, but Sergeant Fury would eventually become Agent Fury, Nick Fury of S.H.I.E.L.D. and be running the superhero. So it's still the dawn of these characters, but not really a superhero book or even a modern book. Then in July of 1963, Doctor Strange made his debut and X-Men issue 1 came out, debuting all of the original mutants. Also, Avengers issue 1 made its debut. Now, this was the team up of all of the periphery characters that weren't the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. That actually is a response to the Justice League. It just took a long time to come out. And at the same time, Fantastic Four Annual #1 came out. This was a thing Marvel did for, 40 years, 50 years, where when their comic got big and popular, I think it started with Fantastic Four, they would put out a big, thick annual every year. And then it was all the way until the next year, February of 1964, we got Daredevil issue 1. And that's pretty much the end of the creation of all of the modern Marvel characters. That was it, that brief little period, 1961 through 1964. In June of 1964, you had Spider-Man Annual #1. So look, you've got another big book on your hands. And in the next month, in July of 1964, you got Sergeant Fury issue 10, which is my oldest Marvel comic. So that's where it falls into the timeline. This came out on the same day as Fantastic Four issue 31, Spider-Man issue 17, and Avengers issue number 8. Now, the following year, January 1965, Ka-Zar makes his return to the Marvel Universe, appearing in X-Men issue 10. Now, this is a new version, updated and with a little bit of changes from the Golden Age Ka-Zar that was from way back in 1939 in Marvel Comics number 1, and actually prior to that in the pulp magazines from the mid-30s from Marvel. Then in June of 1965, Sergeant Fury gets an annual, so it's another big book. So maybe this one counts for you. The following year, July 1966, you have the Black Panther making his debut. It was issue 52 of the Fantastic Four, and he would get his own comic from time to time called Jungle Action. He was really never a successful or selling character. Yes, he had a modern movie that was very successful, but I don't know if this really counts as a big major classic character. It does now in hindsight, but so there you go. There's somebody that came out after Daredevil. But that was it. In October of 1970, Conan made his debut. Not a Marvel superhero, just a licensed character, but he's had a tremendous comic book presence, not only with Marvel, but many other companies still to this day. I get Conan comics every month. But in June of 1972, you had the debut of Luke Cage, Power Man, who had his own comic. It ran for 125 issues. He teamed up with Iron Fist. He's had many returns. He had his own TV series. Maybe that's the only big major character launched since those initial first 2-3 years of Marvel superheroes. Now, the next month in July 1972, you had Ghost Rider make his debut, so there's another big character. And here's one I don't think counts. The following year, July 1973, Blade makes his debut. This was just a character supporting cast of a Dracula comic that nobody bought. Nobody knew Blade existed for decades until that Wesley Snipes movie came out. Okay, so I don't think the character counts as anything major. But at the end of that year, December of 1973, Shang-Chi made his debut, and so did Howard the Duck. They both had their own comics that lasted a very long time. They've both had movies, so the 70s are kind of weird. The following year, February of 1974, The Punisher made his debut. No superpowers, just a guy with a gun, but he is popular, had a lot of his own comics. Bunch of movies. April of 1974, I Was Born, and the next month, May of 1974, the debut of Iron Fist, and that is the only comic I have of the debut of a major Marvel character. Look, signed by his creator to me. 5 months later, October of 1974, Wolverine would make his debut. Shortly after that, all the newer X-Men came in. The following year, 1975, you had Moon Knight make his debut, and that's basically it. The 80s brought stuff like She-Hulk and the New Mutants, what have you, and then as you get into, the 90s and the 2000s, you get all these modern characters like Squirrel Girl and Spider-Gwen and Miles Morales, and maybe those are the new classics. I don't know. I don't think kids care about comics anymore. They're into trading cards and what have you, so that's basically it. But there's your history. Take it or leave it. I'll see you next time.